Welcome to the Sales for Nerds podcast. I'm Chief Nerd Ruben Swartz. If you feel more comfortable with SQL than sales calls, more at home writing test suites than proposals, more interested in crunching numbers than shaking hands, if you think networking should be about routers rather than cocktails with strangers, and if you're more interested in debating code editors than negotiating deals, but somehow you ended up responsible for some of those sales and marketing activities, this is the podcast for you. Welcome, everyone. Today, I'm excited to have Chris Wike, and actually, he is having me in his amazing conference room, which we'll discuss in a minute. Chris is a partner at Hajar Peters. He specializes in labor and employment law, federal litigation and compliance and mediation. He's also the woodworker in chief. He's a classical musician, and he is a guy who is big into wine. And we'll get a little bit more into that in a second. But Chris, thanks for coming on the show.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ruben. Glad to have you over.
And we had Brian Spross on earlier talking about some of the legal issues that entrepreneurs might face. This time, we're not going to go into that so much. We're going to have a great time drinking wine. And Chris is going to talk about sales and marketing from the perspective of a lawyer. So Chris, I'm in your conference room, which we'll have a picture of later, but it's got one of the most spectacular views of any conference room in Austin. And outside, there's just a parking lot, but inside, there's an entire wall of wine and champagne and whiskey and I don't know what else. But what are we having tonight?
Yeah, so Ruben, the nice thing about being the boss is you get to do stuff like this. And so, my partners, before I was here, they turned one of these walls into a 1,500 bottle wine cellar. And so we use this space all the time for everything from conferences to events to everything else. So what I pulled tonight is this is a Grenache from Resign Wine. And Resign Wine is actually a company that is based here in Austin. However, the wines are made and all the grapes are from California. So they're really, really spectacular California wines, but by going with Resign, you're getting a fantastic wine at a very good price, and you're supporting a local Austin business as well.
Now, how does that work if they're based here, but do they truck the grapes in from California?
The wines are made in California and brought in, so the bottles are brought in.
So they live here but spend a bunch of time in California? How does this, I'm trying to figure out how this works.
That's my understanding. My understanding is they're chief winemakers out in California.
Okay.
But fantastic business. You're probably not going to find them in a Total Wine, but the last time I ordered from them, they actually personally delivered to the office. So, but you can go to resignwine.com, RESIGN wine.com, and take a look at what they have. It's really, really good stuff.
Awesome. Well, based on what I'm tasting so far, it sounds like a good idea, and we'll have a link to that in the show notes, obviously. What do we actually have in our glasses?
This is Grenache. So.
Very nice. Now, before we dive in, one of the things that's interesting for folks who are not in the legal profession, they may not be aware that there are restrictions on how lawyers can sell and market themselves. So maybe just give us a high-level overview of what that means.
There are, under the ethics rules, and each state's ethics rules differ a little bit. There are some restrictions on how we can market and certain disclosures that have to be made and certain things that have to be approved before they can go out. So, for things like direct mailings, for, email messages, for commercials, things like that, then there's got to be right disclosures about who the attorney is, what their specific specializations are, and all of that. I mean, to be honest, we don't do any of that.
Right.
And so it really never becomes an issue. But then as far as marketing too, it's one of the things that is probably the general population likes and annoys attorneys is, we are not allowed to market or solicit to people for specific things. And so, the typical thing would be the what we call the ambulance chaser, the guy who's chasing the ambulance to the hospital in order to give his card to the person who's just been injured in a car wreck. You can't do that under the ethics rules. But a lot of times for me, I will see an employment lawsuit that's been filed against a business, and I can't directly reach out to that business and say, hey, I saw this lawsuit was filed. Do you need any help? That's not something that's permitted at all.
And so for most people, that's kind of how they might think about pursuing business, right? Like you see something that you think you can help with, you reach out and you offer to help. And that's basically off the table.
More or less. You can do that if the person is an existing client.
Right.
So if it's a client that I've had or a client of the firm or I've done work for them in the past and I see a suit, I can reach out to them and solicit for specific work. But otherwise, no, that's a That's a no-no. And it's funny, Ruben, I've got a funny, there's a gentleman who I graduated law school with, and he's got some pretty interesting commercials that he put up on the internet that have gotten him in some trouble. So I'll send you the links to those because they are definitely worth a look on what not to do. Although his marketing was wildly successful in getting his name out there, it's not what you want to do.
Now, in theory, I think you have to get approval for internet ads and whatnot, right? Like you're not supposed to just go run stuff the way a quote unquote normal business would.
Yeah, for commercials and things like that, they do need bar approval. So, and I'll be honest, I don't know the nuts and bolts of the approvals that are needed because we just don't do that stuff. And I think there's a difference in that in the types of law firms and who they're marketing to. You know, for example, my client base tends to be long-standing, long relationships, typically with businesses, sometimes with individuals and entrepreneurs and things like that. That's very different than the guy who does personal injury work.
Right.
And all he has is a one-off client. So this guy comes in his office one time and he never sees him again. And in that way, you're trying to market out. And those are the billboards you'll see up around town. And those are the commercials you'll see. Have you been injured? Things like that. But then, that's typically that's not what we do.
And then there's probably some other stuff that's kind of in between, right? There's a lot of stuff like people should have a will or medical power of attorney or something like that, which is not necessarily a long-standing thing, but isn't ambulance chasing either, right? It is kind of a more transactional business, and you're in a more relationship business.
Absolutely. I am 100% in the relationship business. And even if we are talking about someone needing a will or some kind of trust work done, they may come in at 25 years old and need a will because they just had their first child or whatever it is. And that may be a very simple process. And over the course of the next 40 or 50 years, that will gets changed many, many times. And ultimately, we're probably at least taking a look at the will once a year just to make sure everything's still appropriate and correct. So, even those clients for us don't really go away.
Right.
I would say the one area that we do that hopefully you get a one-off is our family law guys. So, and unfortunately you get some repeat clients on that as well. But, ultimately those are ones you hope that, for their best interest that they only have to come in our office, for one specific issue.
Now, so obviously having long-standing clients is pretty much what every service business wants to do. But at some point, you've got to get them in the door for the first time. How does that work in a legal context?
It really depends on who you're marketing to. Prior to coming over to Hajar Peters, I was at a big international labor employment boutique. Fantastic firm, I've represented a number of Fortune 50 companies. But when you're at a big shop like that with high fees and 50 offices worldwide, you're marketing to a different type of client than you are being where I am, which is one of the reasons why I enjoy being where I am so much, because I get to work with a smaller local business, and that the fee structure and the cost and the personal touch and relationship makes way more sense than, being a hired gun for XYZ big bank who's based in Chicago or New York, and you've never met them and you don't know anything. They just need someone to do their stuff, and you just do their stuff.
Right.
So that's a really different situation, but it's relational. And, my strategy, which hopefully has started to become successful, hopefully it will continue to be, was I started the relationship building with the guys who were probably the second or third tier guys a lot.
What does that mean?
So, for example, when I was at the big firm, typically the people who can send us work are either high-level HR people, a CFO, or a general counsel. Those are typically the people who are sending work. Those people didn't have time to talk to me.
Right.
They didn't have time. They wouldn't take my calls. They didn't care about taking my calls. But if you look at a legal department, typically I try to develop relationships with the junior level attorneys that may be in-house, or the lower level HR people, because guess what? The lower level HR people become the higher level HR people, and the lower level attorneys become the higher level attorneys. And it takes a little time, but it's the old adage, I assume it works for every industry. It's definitely said in the legal industry that, you don't wait until you're thirsty to start digging a well.
Right.
So you really have to start that process thinking 5, even 10 years out for what your client base is going to look like when all those people start taking over and have a choice about where stuff goes.
I think everyone would say, yeah, that's a great strategy, but what am I going to eat or drink in the intervening 5 or 10 years?
That is the tough thing. It's, and speaking for attorneys, that's the best advice I give to people. And whether they listen to me or not, and it's the same advice I had and probably ignored for many years, but you have to have those relationships, because otherwise that's how you control your career. And that's how you're able to, leave and go to a new place and pick up, and your people come with you because they know you. And ultimately it's no different. I mean, when you get to the super big company, a lot of times they are sending things out on price. And they may see, for most things, they may see legal work as a commodity, and they're just looking for bottom line, shareholder issues, whatever. But when you get past that, and even at really big companies, people hire attorneys, not firms. And so they want to send something to someone who they trust, who they know, and they feel more comfortable doing that. And that's going to be probably the same for any industry and any profession out there, that people like doing business with people they like.
And that makes a lot of sense. And the whole strategy of, hey, let's cultivate good relationships with people makes a lot of sense. How do you cultivate those relationships in a way that's authentic and where they get to know a little bit about you and trust you, not just like you, but trust that you're going to solve their problem when, perhaps the big honcho is still outsourcing work to some other firm?
It's tough. It's a constant trial and error for me. I think that one of the things that what I try to do anytime I have a new conversation or meet a new person and we may sit down, first thing is I never pitch who I am or what I can do or what the firm can do. Ideally for 2 or 3 meetings, and that's usually when it gets brought up. So I try not to bring it up until it gets brought up. And really, I try and spend that time getting to know the person, asking more questions than giving answers. And ultimately, I try and leave every conversation with someone with, what can I do to help you? Is there someone I can introduce you to? Or what do you need help with that may not have anything to do with legal? But that's the difficult thing, is breaking through people's barriers of knowing that this is more than just a guy who wants my money. This is a person who's actually cares about me and is helpful to me. And so that's helpful. I try and keep a very big network of trusted people who in all sorts of different professions. So anytime I meet someone who I think is really good in a profession where I don't have someone fill in that spot, that's great for me. Because ultimately for my clients, I want to be the gatekeeper and the disseminator of work for other things. So it could be anything from me sending them to an interior designer, who I know a fantastic one, to work on their house, to a builder to do a remodel on their home, to someone who's going to write their insurance, whether that be commercial or individual. And ultimately, all those people I know, they understand that they're on a short leash. And so if they get a referral from me and I send someone to them, they have an obligation to take care of them as if it's their most important client. And I do the same thing for them. But, really having that, so it's when you can get in that position where people are calling you and asking you for, hey, who do you know who does this, just because they trust you, right? That's a really powerful position to be in. And it shows that the relationship is really a real relationship.
And I'm not trying to doubt, I'm trying to probe a little bit, because I think, again, everyone will be like, yeah, once you're in that position, it totally works really well. But how do you even get someone to take your call or spend time with you at the very beginning to start that relationship? How do you convince them? Because everyone's coming to them and saying, I only care about you, I don't care about me, and I'm genuine, and blah, 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 blah. And some percentage of people are, and some percentage of people aren't. But a lot of people get jaded by hearing those pitches, right? And they don't even want to spend time. How do you break the ice? How do you get started?
Definitely depends on the person. Several ways that have been effective for me. I mean, typically, one way that's been effective in getting cold call sit-down meetings is just legitimately asking people for advice and help. And I've sent, I've called general counsels of companies, and not because I was making it up or selling some story. I've just legitimately said, I know you don't know me. I had some questions, maybe they're career questions, maybe they're whatever. I would really just like your insight and advice. Would you have time for me to buy you lunch? And 95% of the time, you get that meeting. And that's the first step to building a relationship, when people like helping other people. And probably more than anything, people like doling out advice.
Right.
That's a lot of people's favorite hobby. But so when you're legitimately and sincerely asking for their advice, that's a good way to get meetings. Another way is just trying to add value to people's lives. I think, and that may not be in what you do, but what that really means is you have to listen when you talk to people, because they're going to probably tip you off to something that may be a door for you to go into. That and sometimes it's just I've wanted to know more about their business, or sometimes it has been they're talking about they just want someone relatively intelligent to bounce some ideas off of, and if you are interested in what they do, a lot of times that's a great way to start a meeting. I use this place here at the firm in the wine cellar.
Right.
But it's a great one. It's just network building. And so one of the things that I do, which has been a lot of fun, is, I do these events once a month, and I invite 10 people out. And there are 2 rules to my events. If you tell me you're going to come, you have to come. And if you're going to come, you have to bring someone else who is interesting. And I don't dictate to people what interesting means. I don't tell them, bring someone who's beneficial to me or who could be a client. I just let them go. And and what it ends up being is you end up being the hub for all these different spokes of people. And it's a fascinating event because I see all these people connecting who would never otherwise connect in their lives. And, it kind of builds a brand for you, that people have started to kind of get the idea that, hey, when Chris invites you to something, it's going to be worth your time to go. You probably want to go.
Both for the wine and the people.
Both for the wine. Yeah. So that's definitely, we go through a lot of wine at those events as well. So that's kind of having a place like this is great, but I don't think you have to have a place like this to do that. Peter Stropel has been very successful with his Friends of Peter group that meets on Saturday mornings. And Peter's a fantastic individual, great connector. But they just meet in a restaurant and they just talk about a given topic. And through that group, I've met some of the most amazing people in Austin, just because it's a very sincere group and it's a group of people that really care about others. But it's people I never would have ever met or never would have crossed paths with. So So I think you just have to be creative. And honestly, I've done lots of trial and error. And so you try it, and if it doesn't work, fine, let's try something different. So,
like worst case scenario, you drink a little bit of wine by yourself or whatever, and you move on. And I think you raise a really good point, which is everyone is so busy and so focused on being productive. Sometimes it's hard to step back and realize that you really do have to start digging your well or planting your tree or whatever long-term thing you're doing, and that just takes time, and it takes an expectation that there aren't direct results. And I think so much of the thinking in business it's very linear and very direct results, right? You do A, you get B. Not you do A, you let B percolate, C comes in, and then a year later, Q comes in and gives you a big contract, right?
It is, yeah, and that's the reality is I'm a big believer in optionality. So I don't even know if that's a real word, but it's a word I use on a regular basis because I try and make decisions on whatever decision is going to give me the most options for success in the future. Because I don't know what's going to look like, a year, a month, a day down the line. And so by doing that, sometimes you're right. Sometimes you invest a lot of time in people and you never get anything from it. And sometimes the people that you least expected end up being fantastic clients and relationships that you never would have crossed your path. So, just a story that happened this week is there was a company that I did some work for, and they had a lower level HR person, and And, kind of same deal. I just kind of tried to take care of them the best I could. And she had a legal issue that was outside of what we did, got her to the right person. And not only that, kept checking on her and her family, just making sure everything was going well. Doesn't need any help. And honestly didn't hear from her for 5 or 6 years until this week when, guess what? She's at a new company who was looking to make a change on legal counsel. They had the right issue. And I got a cold call from someone in-house counsel I'd never heard of who said that this person wanted to work with me. And so, things like that happen, but you just don't know when they're going to develop and you have no control over it. So it's frustrating, but you have to put as many irons in the fire as possible because when they start coming out, they start coming out. It seems like in rapid succession. You just don't know when it's going to start.
I think something else as well is, obviously, it's great when someone comes to you and says, hey, we want to hire you. But every once in a while, I get some random call out of the blue like, hey, Ruben, we spoke 2 years ago at whatever, and I really appreciate the advice you gave me about XYZ. It really helped me land this next job or whatever. And it was like someone I hadn't thought about for that whole time. And sometimes you might talk to someone and not help them at all. Sometimes you might help them and know it immediately. Sometimes you help them and you don't know it till later, till they thank you or till they call you up and say, let's work together. But I think you're right. It takes time and it takes not having to have a ledger balance with everybody, right? You're just trying to contribute and bring people together and something good will come of it eventually.
I would hope that everyone works this way. I guess not everyone does. I'm a firm believer in trying to live my life under the theory that if you help people out and try and do what's right, then eventually that's going to turn out well for you, in the long run at least.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's what one of the other nice things about not being at the big firm now is really being able to control my own schedule and do the things that I think are important. And honestly, I take a lot of calls that I can never bill for. I dole out a lot of advice that, I don't see any dollars for, but ultimately, anytime, especially a business or an entrepreneur, someone comes with me, it is in my best interest for them to be as successful as possible. That is the best thing that can happen to me. So if it means I give up 15 minutes of my day to help them out to get to that point, I assume that's going to come back around at some point. I mean, it's not worth my time to send them a 15-minute bill. And because that, to me, that doesn't establish a relationship. That establishes someone who owes me money, but when people understand that, look, I'm really willing to help you out. And I understand there is nothing that can come from this. And I get people who tell me, it's like, you need to, I expect you to send me a bill for this. I'm like, honestly, it's not worth my time. I want you to be as successful as possible. And when you are, I hope we can be of service to you in the future. And that's how but you have to take those frustrating, non-billable calls that eat up your day. And it's, my experience has been that those pay off in the long run. And sometimes they don't pay off for that person. Sometimes they pay off for who they send to you that you never expected and never hit your radar screen. So
it's funny. I remember my stepmom was a legal secretary, and the partners in her firm were very into, you got to make sure you bill for everything unless it was an incoming call. And they would always take the incoming calls and always spend whatever time they needed because you never knew who this person was or who they knew. And they always thought it was worthwhile to do that. And I think, again, I've fallen prey to this myself, right? Sometimes you're just busy. It's not even like you want to be a jerk to anyone or anything. You're just busy. You don't have time. And something I've tried to get better at is, even if I don't have time, there's always time to spend a couple minutes to refer somebody to someone who can really help them, right? If it's not me. So they go away with a solution to their problem and hopefully a positive view of their interaction with me, instead of just, oh, I blew them off because think I'm too much of a big shot or whatever.
Yeah, no, it is completely a matter of making time. And if you don't make the time, then I think it's short-sighted from a networking perspective, from a development perspective, from a future client perspective. And you're right. It is sometimes you do not have time and you just have to find it. And even if that is just a quick email that says, I am so underwater today, but can we speak in the morning? Or can we get breakfast? Or can we, if there's any way this can wait, then if it can't wait, tell me and I'll make time. But if it can wait, it'd be great if we could talk tomorrow. and sometimes that's enough. But you have to take the time to send that 20-second email.
Right.
And a lot of times people don't, or it's just not important enough to hit the radar. So
it's my principle of treating people like people, right? When you treat people as something other than people, they're a client or they're a prospect or they're a vendor or they're whatever, right? They're someone who's not a full-on person, right? And you feel okay blowing them off or not talking to them respectfully or whatever, that's going to go south. Generally, when you treat people like people, it doesn't always work out swimmingly, but tends to work out okay.
It's I agree. And it's funny, Ruben, because sometimes I forget how many bad people there are in the world, because I try and surround myself with good ones. So, when you start flipping through my network and the people I see on a given basis and interact with, they're all pretty good people, and they all have pretty similar views about taking care of others that I do. But I forget how many selfish a-holes there are out there floating around, and that's, and a lot of times those are my competitors. So hope they never change that, to some degree.
They're keeping you in business too, right?
Absolutely. But no, I agree. You have to, at the end of the day, whatever it is that we're doing, in our professions, there's something that's more important than that. And a lot of times that's just the conversation I have to have with myself in my head is that, look, I know this seems important. I know I've got to get this out, but honestly, taking care of this person has a longer lasting impact than anything I'm currently doing as far as work goes. And it's a hard conversation to have, but you really have to believe it to be true in order to do it.
That makes sense. So just to recap, for folks who might have missed the quick mention of hey, once a month, we're going to bring a bunch of people into this conference room and open up some fantastic wine and have some great conversations. And I'm willing to bet that most people listening to this right now are not looking at their 1,500 bottle wine cellar in their conference room saying, oh, why didn't I think of that? But I don't think you necessarily need to have a setup quite this amazing, right? You can go down to the grocery store and get a few bottles of wine, invite some of your clients for a client appreciation happy hour, and tell them to bring some interesting people.
Absolutely. And I would love to, and it's still an experiment, and it's still a work in progress. And so you got to figure out what works with what you have. But I agree. It's and I think you have to use the tools that you have. So this is just one that happened to fall in my lap because my partners love wine more than Kareem loves wine more than anyone else I know, and so, which is how this wine cellar got built. But this is just what I have. So if that's not what you have, then that's do something else. But yeah, absolutely, and that's what I found too. This has also been an effective tool to get some people together. And like I said, that's always my goal, is to be the hub. I want to be the hub for people, and I want to have lots of spokes and be able to have those people connected. And ultimately, when they start asking each other, okay, how do I know you? That hopefully that comes back to me at some point, because that puts you in a very strong position. But, on the legal side, what I found is, like I said, for the bigger clients, a lot of the higher level HR people, higher level execs, general counsels, some of those people have become good friends. But the people I don't know, honestly, they don't like talking to me because they don't know me, but they love talking to each other. And they love, general counsels love talking shop about what's going on in their companies, how are they doing, best practices, their own experiences, because, they're in a little club themselves. So if you can set something like that up, of a round table, or maybe it's a mastermind, or maybe it's a discussion about a certain topic, and get all those people who are important to you from all the different areas and get them talking to each other,
right?
That puts you in a very strong position as well, because they may or may not want to talk to you, but that's your kind of in.
And again, if you think of that as, I'm going to invite a bunch of people for a topic, and 48 hours later, I'm going to have a bunch of new clients or new contracts, you're probably going to set your event up for failure and not get any contracts. But if you set it up legitimately as, let's get these cool people together and just have good conversations, you can have those good conversations, and that's going to develop into something more meaningful long-term, hopefully.
That has definitely been my experience. So it's, Yeah, absolutely. Ruben, looks like you need a little more wine.
Oh yeah. And by the way, if you want to get on Sales for Nerds, this is really a great way to do it. And Chris did not ask to come on. I asked him when I heard about the legend of this conference room and just started talking to him. But it always helps. I think you're the second guest to supply their own wine. The first one was June Rodil, who's here in Austin, our master sommelier. So always fantastic. Now, let's suppose that things do go well and someone calls you up and says, hey, we've got a matter that might work well for you. I'm imagining in some cases, if it's a former client or something like that, it's more or less a formality to start working. But in other cases, there's going to be competition. There's going to be some back and forth. How does it work for you when it gets to that stage?
It's very contingent on the sophistication of the people. Sometimes you've got a business owner who's this is the first time they've had to pay an attorney for anything.
Okay.
And that's a very different conversation than, the existing company who's, I had a new client as of last year, which is, they're publicly traded and they're here in Austin and their general counsel's a fantastic guy, but he deals with attorneys all the time. It's completely a formality. We know all the same lingo. He knows what to expect. We have a short conversation, then it's go do it. It's different when you've got a smaller client, especially when you've got litigation or something like that, and you're trying to explain to them the business sense and the dollars and how much things cost. And sometimes that's hard because I deal with it every day. And so I guess it's like if you're a surgeon, you forget what it's like that people don't like blood,
right?
And so a lot of times it is having to slow down and explain the process, make sure everybody's comfortable. You got to give them time to get ready for it. And fortunately I'm in a position where I don't like taking retainers from clients. And a lot of people do. It depends on the practice and you want to make sure you get paid. I mean, obviously that's an important thing.
Right.
But if I have concerns about being paid, that's probably not the client I want. So I would rather that go somewhere else.
So lesson one, have your business in a strong enough position that you can say no to prospects, right? And that's where people end up in a lot of trouble chasing things that they have a bad feeling about. And sure enough...
Well, it's either have your business in a strong enough position or it's do it long enough where you've had enough things blow up in your face.
Maybe some of both.
Right. So whether you can afford to do it or not, you decide it's not worth it to mess with. So...
take that much time off your life. Okay, so some people you just get that bad feeling that you don't want to work with them.
Some people you just get the feeling like we're just not going to work well together. I mean, I was having this discussion with one of the fantastic mediators here in town yesterday, and we were just talking about how really as far as labor and employment attorneys go in Austin probably pound for pound has the strongest labor employment bar of any city out there. All of us know each other, both sides of the docket. I know the plaintiff's attorneys, I know the defense attorneys, and there are very, very few who I do not respect or I think are bad at what they do. And I recognize that sometimes when I get a new client that sometimes I just work better with a certain personality type. Sometimes I don't.
Okay.
Sometimes it's just a struggle from the first sentence and whereas it's one of my former colleagues at the old firm who's now at a different firm as well. I remember, within a series of a week, we both were competing for two different clients. One of them loved me. The other one hated me and loved the other guy. So that's just when it's a relational business, you've got to like and trust the person you're with. So, I want to feel like that if you put me head to head with anyone else and you give me a fair shake, that I'm going to come away with wins most of the time. But that's probably just a matter of my own confidence that you have to go sell as much as anything. And, just the reality of trying to be different from the crowd as far as actually caring for people. And I think you're right. I mean, it's the joke about realtors, right? Is that you ask every realtor in town how they're different from other realtors and they say, well, I really care about my clients. Right. And it's kind of like, well, how do you get past that?
And how do you get past that?
It's where the rubber meets the road. It's people notice when you do things for them that have no benefit for you.
Okay.
When you expend some capital in some way, whether that be financial, time, energy, whatever, to help them out in a way that you get no benefit from, and people notice that, you know?
And I think it's hard, especially in law, because like you say, a lot of people don't really understand the minutia of what you're doing. It's kind of like the surgeon, right? How do you select a surgeon? You have no real way to evaluate whether this surgeon or that surgeon is good.
I know I had to laugh at, I saw someone asking for recommendations for a neurosurgeon on Facebook. I was like, is that really where you want to get your referral for a neurosurgeon is on Facebook?
Well, I guess you could tell how smart the people are who are making the recommendations, but right, there's no good way to know unless you're already an expert. And even then, you probably have a bunch of biases and so on. It's like you say, you have to give people the trust that you're going to take care of them and that you seem like a good person and that you mesh well together.
And I think you do have to be, you know, you have to be different. And that's probably a good point for developing clients and networking too, is, you know, I try and go against the crowd, so to speak. And so, and it's always fascinating to me, like when I go to networking events and the people I'm around all the time, I may go to some networking event that's full of business people. And it's always shocking because I'm the only attorney there. And I know the events in town that are going to be filled with attorneys, and I never go to those events. But there are so many fantastic events that I'm not going to share on this show in case any of my colleagues are listening. However, you know, I've found those where I'm surrounded by business owners, I'm surrounded by executives, I'm surrounded by fantastic referral sources, but I'm the only guy there who does what I do.
Right.
And those are great events because typically that's how you meet, that's how you set yourself apart, you know, of getting involved with things like that. You know, obviously nonprofit boards and nonprofit work is also a great way to develop some close relationships, help people out in the meantime and go from there.
So basically go where your customers and partners are, not where your peers are, where everyone's like you. And not that you can't do that as well, but it's not going to help you build your pipeline.
It is shocking to see that other people haven't figured this out. You know,
should we edit that out of the show?
No, you can leave it in. You know, I'll be, maybe we should revisit in a year and I can tell you if I've seen any new faces.
Now you said something earlier that I wanted to come back to, which is that you try to stay away from retainers. And for most people in services businesses, retainer is the holy grail. So what's your thinking there?
My thinking is that usually my clients are not coming as cold calls. So usually they've come from a source. And that's typically the conversation I have with them, which is, one, I've got to kind of have a relative comfort that they're going to be able to pay their bills. If they can't, then that's probably not a good client for me anyway. But they're coming from a source. That's the conversation we have is, you know, I get to say, look, you know, I know you came from Wayne. I know Wayne. Wayne never sends me bad people. So I'm under the assumption that, you know, I'm not going to need to take a retainer, and that if you tell me you're going to pay the bills promptly, that they're going to get paid. So is that what you're telling me? And they usually tell me yes, and they usually do. And occasionally, you know, you monitor it. If they start getting behind, then you kind of have to cut off the faucet. You know, you've done this long enough that you kind of see when things are going the wrong direction. But, you know, 95+% of the time, that's not that's about right. And so, you know, and when I do take retainers, sometimes I will, especially if it's a new client or something that came in from a source I'm not real sure about, I may take a small retainer and I may hold it and bill against it. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I'll just hold the retainer. I'll send invoices. And if the invoices get behind, then I can pull the retainer and have a conversation about moving forward. So, but, you know, as an attorney, having to withdraw is not something you really want to have to do. It's just not, it's not worth it. Nor do I have time to be chasing people down, you know, to pay the bills.
So it kind of goes back to get the right people in your funnel to begin with, and everything else goes much easier.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, and going back to something we talked about a little earlier about kind of the ways I try and set myself apart in what I do. I think one of the things that I try and set myself apart in is that, you know, I try and approach the practice of law and the services I perform for clients like a business partner. not like a service provider. And what that means is, business guys don't speak legal a lot of the times. And so you have to understand the stakeholders. You have to understand the people making decisions. And you have to understand that they may not care about what you're telling them, And that's what I tell people as far as businesses when they're asking me, well, what's your assessment of this? And I say, look, this is what it is. This is the risk. This is how much the risk is. But ultimately, you're a very smart person and you've been successful by running a business, and you've done that by taking risks. And this is just another risk that you take every day. Now, hopefully, I can give you a way to achieve what you want to achieve without that big risk. But sometimes you can't. And sometimes they're going to take the risk anyway.
Right.
Which is what business people do. And sometimes they pay for it dearly, and sometimes they get away with it. And that's the nature of business. But I find so many attorneys tend to be people that you can't do this because of X. And so, I think one of the most valuable lessons, I learned, and I've tried not to use it in client names, and this is actually not a client, so I'll share. But so I spent a couple of years practicing law in Miami. And when I moved back from Miami, I wasn't sure if I was going to stay with my firm. And there was an in-house opportunity that I interviewed for at Whole Foods. And I had a friend who was at Whole Foods. And in prepping me for the interview, he told me two things, which have been probably the most valuable legal lessons I've ever learned about how to be an attorney and how to practice law, especially in Austin. And the first was this. The first was, he said, don't wear a suit to the interview because anytime John Mackey sees someone in the building in a suit, he thinks the feds are here. And, that was a joke. But the reality is, it's like, look, if you wear a suit to the interview, that tells us that you don't know who we are and you don't belong here. And, for a company that has a culture like Whole Foods, which was really, people are going to work in shorts and flip-flops every day, even the high-paid executives sometimes, then, you don't want to show up in a suit because that's not the way and you find that a lot in Austin. I had a mediation and an attorney I know who's coming in from Phoenix for the mediation. And the first question he asked me is, do I need to wear a suit? And I said, dude, you're in Austin. No, you don't need to wear a suit. I will likely wear jeans and a blazer. And he showed up in jeans and a blazer, and I was in jeans and a blazer, and opposing counsel was in jeans and a blazer. And everybody was happy. Right. But you have to understand you have to understand who it is that you're talking to. So the second lesson, which is really the poignant one, is he said, guys like John Mackey who are entrepreneurs who have been incredibly successful and still run their business. He's like, they have gotten to where they are because all along the way, people have told them, you can't do that. And they've said, F you, and done it anyway.
Right.
And when he sees attorneys are people that tell him no. And he doesn't like people who tell him no. And as a result, he doesn't particularly like attorneys. And, something about that conversation really changed my thinking of how to practice law, how to work with businesses, and really how to be a business partner with my clients, because it's not my job to tell them no, unless they're asking me to. Sometimes they ask you to, but ultimately it's not my job to tell them what they can and cannot do. And so it's my job to work with them to navigate whatever issues it is that they're going through and achieve whatever business objectives they want to achieve. And sometimes that may be something that looks crazy on paper, but you have to truly understand the stakeholder. You have to truly understand the objectives and what's important to the people that you're working for. And again, I'm constantly shocked that more attorneys and probably more business people in general don't grasp that, especially if you are trying to provide services or sell into a business. You truly need to understand what the objective is, what's truly important to the business, and who are the stakeholders involved. Sometimes it's, me taking the fall, for a general counsel, because I know if I don't, it's going to be bad for him internally, politically.
Right.
And that is but he's the guy that sends me work. And he is very happy with me to fill this role for him, because
super happy.
Absolutely. So I dive under the bus from time to time, and that's just the way it goes. But you have to be willing to do that and understand what's really at stake.
Well, something that you're saying really rings true to me, because I remember, especially when I was a lot younger and I was like talking to people twice my age. Doesn't happen very much anymore mathematically, but it was like I felt like my job was to show people that I had the credentials and the sort of the expertise to do what they were asking me to do. And so there was a lot of sort of like blurting out a bunch of crap that wasn't useful. It's like the surgeon telling you all the minutia of the surgery that you don't care about, but just so it's like he sounds like he's really smart kind of thing, and he knows about surgery or law or whatever. And I think that's a trap that a lot of expert service providers fall into, right? Thinking they have to keep demonstrating their expertise by sounding really smart on whatever the topic is, whether or not the client cares about that particular topic or that level of detail, versus, like you say, listening and trying to understand what the real objective is and using your expertise to help serve that objective.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I ended up with a client, kind of based on that thinking. And it was kind of relatively after when I put this new practice into place. And it was kind of a trial and error, but it was kind of a funny issue. So I had a client who was in the oil and gas space. And so, during the frack boom up in the Bakken Shale up in North Dakota, it was like the Wild West up there. And so you had all these companies that were putting up housing for these people because there's not enough housing in North Dakota to take care of people. And so apparently someone figured out if he got a doctor's note, he could have a dog in the apartment. And they didn't allow dogs in the apartment. And so the owner of the company was incredibly concerned because there were starting to be more and more dogs, and he didn't want dogs in the... And so he wanted these... Basically what he wanted to do is he wanted to charge kind of this huge, punitive, non-refundable dog deposit. And I was like, well, you can't do that. Or I was talking to their general counsel, not the owner. I said, well, that's not something that we want to do under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And he said, well, I don't know why we can't do that. I said, well, look at it this way. The ADA would treat, a service animal the same way it would treat someone in a wheelchair. And so you would not be able to charge someone a non-refundable wheelchair deposit because they're going to destroy the carpet in the apartment. So in the same way, you can't. And so, but through that process, I kind of dove in, figured out what the issues were, figured out what he was concerned about, and got to give them 3 or 4 options of things that would meet all those concerns. And I gave him 1, this is what I think the best option is. And then 2 is like, I understand if you don't like option 1 because of X. So if you don't, this is probably the second best option, but it leaves you some risk. But if you don't like 2, here's 3, which creates a different set of issues. But, we can do that as well. And then if you don't, here's 4. And 4 was probably the non-refundable dog deposit, which is something they can do if they want to, if that's really what they want to do. But ultimately the goal was he was just tired of losing money from having to refinish the apartments. So there are ways we can address that issue and make them whole without violating the law and without creating legal issues and stirring up litigation. So, and because of that email, that particular general counsel replied to me and said, this is the most helpful email I've ever gotten from an attorney. And I ended up pulling that work away from the firm that was currently doing their labor work, which was also the firm where the general counsel had come from. So, it really is amazing when you start to understand who it is that you're selling to and what it is that they're truly concerned about, that, sales go a lot easier. And so I think that's exactly right. What you said about feeling the need to spew information to show how intelligent you are. I think it shows our maturity when we stop making statements and start asking more questions. Mm-hmm. And that really is, the key, that this is someone who wants to understand the problem so that he can address it, rather than someone who is trying to win some mythical beauty contest that he's not going to win anyway.
Well, I think what's funny is you go through school, in college and law school or whatever, and it kind of is about, you get rewarded for spewing information, right? And then you get into the business world and you got there because you could spew information better than the average bear. And so you keep doing that until you realize, wait a second, all the people who really know what they're doing, the people I really respect, they're awfully quiet, right? They ask questions and they just sit there. Maybe I should learn something from that. And, it's something that I wish our educational system would address a little bit better. But I think you're right. First of all, obviously it's going to lead to much better results in sales and business and financial results and so on. But it also, one thing I noticed is, God, it feels so much better to actually solve someone's problem than to just throw a bunch of my expertise at them and hope it works. I mean, there were so many projects I did as a consultant where I threw a bunch of expertise at people, and I would get frustrated that they weren't taking all my brilliant advice, because I was like the surgeon giving them the step-by-step breakdown of what I was doing and wondering why they didn't care, versus, like you say, take the time to actually understand what they need and then solve their real problem. And, that's hopefully what we're trying to do while we're here, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think if you can provide value to people, and that's value to them, is giving them an option they hadn't considered before. Because, especially when I'm dealing with in-house attorneys, these guys are way smarter than I am. You don't get to that position by being a schmuck in law school, or being unable to communicate or unable to perform work. It's, but, kind of trying to be that trusted advisor that they think, well, let me run this by this person because they may have some ideas I haven't thought about. I mean, that puts you in a great position. But, and let me tell you, let me shift gears away from legal for a minute, because you mentioned that I am a retired musician anyway. And so, it was really interesting when I still play some gigs from time to time. I'm still in a position from time to time where I hire musicians. And there's one show in specific that I serve as a music director, and I end up hiring, an entire pit band for that show.
What's the show? Plug the show.
So I do the musical for one of the high schools here in the Austin area every year, which is great. The theater director is fantastic. She gives me complete authority and a budget to go hire the band. And so these guys end up having this particular high school has the best pit band of any high school in Texas. I promise, because, she just gives me complete control to go hire who I want. And I know the guys, and I'm bringing in the best players in Austin to come play these shows. So, and, kind of same deal. They keep coming back because I treat them well. I do what I say. I'm not going to, regardless. But it was funny because one of my piano players one year would finish a run and he said, hey, I had a great time. I'd love to play next year. And I said, look, I've got 2 rules about my musicians. I want you to be really, really good at what you do, and don't be an asshole. And it is shocking how difficult it is to find both of those things in the same person. Yeah. And I think that's true whether it's in the music world or whether it's and even when I was in Miami, I played a season with the Miami Symphony, and it was almost comical to see the principal player who would hire the substitute musicians and the extras and all that. And, it'd be something as silly as, hey man, that guy was, I enjoyed playing with him last time. I thought he was really good. And he's like, no, I'm not hiring that guy back. He's like, he came to this rehearsal. That guy had like way too much garlic for dinner. And like, I'm just not going to deal with that. His breath was awful, and it's like, this is what people think you're making your living based on being really good, but it's more than that. It's interpersonal relationships, and it's things like that. And so, going to the music, I think every music school would benefit its students by teaching a class on, how to not be a jerk. But seriously, and how to network. And I think every law school is doing their students a disservice by not teaching their students how to build relationships and how to network.
Did they teach you how not to be a jerk in law school?
They did not. They did not. That has been a
sort of the stereotype, right?
A long system of trial and error. So, no, that's actually the funny joke. When when I graduated and walked across the stage, I'm not I get accused of being a guy who doesn't smile a great deal of the time. And
he's smiling right now, just FYI.
Well, so when I got the picture, I had this big smile on my face as I'm getting my diploma, and my dad was giving me some grief and said, yeah, it's a pretty big smile you have on your face. And I said, you know what? I'm walking across that stage thinking, I never have to talk to some of these people ever again in my life. And it's a good feeling. So we do get that. There's a lot of fantastic people who are attorneys. There's some jerks too, but it's, so I don't know that maybe I've just been in the club too long I stopped noticing the jerks as much as everybody else, but.
Well, and if you can build things the right way and not have to spend as much time with the jerks, that really helps. It's one thing I've noticed, right? Like when you work for yourself and you get to pick your own clients, you get to pick your own partners to a certain extent, you get to pick your own coworkers. There is a lot to be said for competence. And like you said, there's a lot to be said for not being an asshole.
It is. And honestly, it is. This has been my observation, is, which I would hold true at least 99% of the time, is, one of two things happens with guys who are jerks or assholes, is that, especially in the legal profession, either they don't make it or they're miserable. And I don't want to be either one of those things.
Right. But a lot of them are the sort of the face of the profession, right? They are the quote unquote most successful, drive the fanciest cars, wear the nicest suits in any profession, whether it's law or software or entertainment or what have you, right?
No, that's right. It's I'm never cease to be amazed by the number of people I encounter in C-suite offices who have no business in a C-suite office. And it's just, the ability to BS or the ability to, scratch the right back or whatever has gotten them into that office. But they really don't. That is not the type of person that could ever start their own business and be successful. They are constantly going to be someone's employee.
And to a certain extent, they're always fighting some kind of battle, right? To sort of maintain their place, because their place is maintained by dominance or deception or whatever, not by leadership, service, and so on.
Absolutely. And when something goes south, their quote unquote friends or disappear.
And a lot of them are very slick, and they will land some similar gig at some other place and keep going until all the bridges are burned. But like you say, it's not really how I want to live my life.
It's, I am much happier sitting in this conference room drinking wine with you right now than I am living that life. So I had my opportunity, and fortunately I made the right decision, or at least I think I did.
Well, I'm glad that I rank ahead of, at least the wine in me rank ahead of working with a bunch of jerks. Chris, thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it. And like you said, I started this just so that I could have really interesting conversations with people. I think there's some great stuff in here, whether you're an attorney or not. Just this notion of being interesting, being helpful, giving people a chance to connect, and trying to live life well. Cheers.
Cheers. Thank you so much, Ruben.